Hello everyone and welcome to the Dyslexia Life Hacks Show. I'm your host Matthew Head, and in this episode I'm talking to Richard Purcell. He is the co-founder of CareScribe, which has two projects, Caption.ed and Talk Type. Caption.ed is an AI-powered note-taking software where Talk Type deals with dictation. He's previously been a doctor and the founder of a software called Medincle that assists people with medical jargon and terminology. As always, I'll put links to CareScribe and other things we talk about in the show notes, which will be available at dyslexialifehacks.com/podcast. Welcome to the show, Richard.
Thanks very much. Nice to be here. Thanks for the invite, Matthew.
No problem at all. So where I wanted to start off with this conversation is studying to be a doctor. I've had a doctor on the podcast before, but they weren't dyslexic themselves. But a doctorate and doing medical stuff seems like quite a difficult thing to study as a dyslexic person.
I think probably kind of yes and no. I think so. I guess in my schooling, I was kind of good at two kind of opposites. I was good at in arts, so I was very interested in the arts and very practical subjects, and I was interested in or succeeded in science. Struggling in those kind of those language subjects, anything basically that involved any significant writing or anything like that, I'd kind of struggle in. And once I started to get some support at school, which was quite late on actually, it became going to university and became an option, and studying sometimes more challenging course like medicine became an option as well. I managed to get into medical school. As I say, it was quite late. I got the support, and the support at school made a massive difference. So when I got into medical school, I certainly found it very challenging. There was no kind of doubt about that. I kind of felt very out of my depth. But the good thing about medicine is it's pretty much all, or the university that I went to is pretty much all multiple choice question exams. So very little, so you got basically the sort of science part of it was all kind of multiple choice exams. So I didn't have to write essays and write theses and things like that, which I would find pretty much impossible. What I did have to do was multiple choice exams, and then there's the practical stuff, which I found I was more than capable of doing, and the communication work as well. So those sorts of things came naturally to me. Learning huge swathes of information, not so much. But one thing I tend to do is just try and get my head down. And I always think if I'm not as smart as somebody else, I can certainly work as hard, if not harder. So that tended to get me through.
Yeah, that sounds great. And I imagine dyslexic visual skills really help being a doctor in terms of imagining, I don't know, hypothetical, for example, a disease propagating through the body. You can kind of visualize it all moving through, and that's kind of how you worked it out in your head, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it came to things like anatomy and things like that, again came very naturally to me. I could kind of think in those kind of 3D sort of forms. That was never a difficulty. The other thing I tended to find is for me to sort of commit things to memory, I very much had to. I couldn't rote learn. I had to understand core concepts, which it's quite good in medicine to give you. You have to work really hard to do that. But it's a lot easier, I think, just to if you can just remember facts and pages of textbooks. I'd have to do research and kind of go right back to kind of core principles, which then was very useful later on, because if you understand things if you really understand things, then you can build on that knowledge. And I found that was quite useful in just the way I kind of naturally learned. So kind of going back to core basics. Some areas of medicine that's quite difficult because there are gaps in knowledge in medicine, and in some pretty prominent places, But and so you'd end up hitting a brick wall, and there'd be no answer to that question. And
and I could see that the benefits of not rote learning particularly some of the early stuff, because you're building yourself a massive foundation. So it's almost like you take the hit early on that pays off as you get more and more into the detail.
Exactly. Yeah. So the university I went to, which was the University of Bristol, is a very traditional kind of university. So their structure is 3 years of kind of lectures, or at least 2 years and a bit of kind of 9 to 5 lectures, and then kind of the what you kind of call the clinical work. So you get on the wards and you start to do some more of the practical things and the kind of interacting more with patients. And I certainly found those kind of 3 years of a huge amount of information, usually in a format that really wasn't suited to my way of learning, incredibly challenging. I sort of my way of dealing with that really was just to get my head down and think, well, I might be struggling more than anybody else, but I could really I can work harder. So I just kind of spent a lot of time just working hard really and trying to commit things to memory,
being relentless basically.
Pretty much.
Yeah. There is I think a degree of relentlessness does help, doesn't it, particularly when you get into complicated university studies.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you mentioned that I assume at some point late in schooling is when you found out you were dyslexic and got some extra support. So how did that come about?
So I kind of like I described really. I was good at sort of sciences. I was kind of doing pretty well at, and I was good at art, but I was always struggling in anything English based. I was really struggling, and to the extent that it was just, you look back at my old sort of school reports, it was so obvious, it was kind of, A's over here and kind of failing over here. And kind of, I didn't have a diagnosis of dyslexia till a bit later on. So it was kind of, you'd sort of sit in parents' evening and it would be a bit of kind of, maybe if he just applies himself more or anything like that. But it never really added up. Yeah, it's such a frustrating thing. But then, probably should have got a diagnosis earlier. The dyslexia runs in my family, and just kind of, I don't think, for whatever reason, I don't know if it crossed our minds. But when I did get a dyslexia diagnosis, and then sort of made the school aware, they were fantastic, and they just adapted a little bit in the way they were kind of teaching me, offered me a little bit of extra support. I was reasonably close to my GCSEs at the time, so they kind of really helped out in sort of trying to sort of kind of last minute prepare me in the ways they could. Which kind of got me through those exams, and made sure I kind of passed all the ones I kind of could. And it was just kind of I think the approach to learning and the things that were happening in some classes that were very detrimental to me kind of stopped happening. Things like reading out loud from a book, which has had, I can see now, like further down the line, has had really significant impacts on me and the way I've kind of developed, because that is just not any good for me. I just cannot do that. So I had long-term problems with public speaking, which took me a long time to overcome, which kind of stemmed from that kind of being put on the spot, trying to read out of a book and just failing miserably in front of my class. So things like that got kind of addressed, and I got kind of the support I needed, which was excellent.
Okay, and then rolling into university, did you then get like assistive technology and support like that, or?
Yeah, so I went. So I kind of got through my GCSEs. A-level time came around, and I had that extra bit of support when I sort of moved on to A-levels. So did really well there, which was great. And then I applied through the DSA, so the Disabled Students Allowance, and got some hardware and software to support me in my studies. So I had those tools kind of going into university, which was really useful. I didn't quite get all the value I kind of wanted out of some of the kit, but what I essentially ended up doing in the end was building a bit of tech that I wish I had when I started. Myself and a friend of mine kind of teamed up and built a bit of tech, and that kind of turned into my first assistive tech business.
Yes. So before we get into your assistive tech business, what sort of tech did you have at university?
Now that's a test. I had some mind mapping software. I had some dictation software. And I also had, I'm trying to remember, I had some note taking software as well.
Okay, cool.
And I also had a digital voice recorder as well.
Yes.
Which,
Yeah. I think I had one of them. I just never ever used it.
Yeah. I think I was the same, actually.
Yeah, so, no, I'm not going to put this in the front of the
I could never remember to charge it. I think that was the problem.
Oh, mine had to. Had replaceable batteries, even worse.
Oh, there you are.
Okay, so you then rolled out into work as a doctor. Did you take any assistive technology with you, or what sort of strategies were you using as a doctor at that point? I mean, doctors as a whole are notorious for having really bad note taking and writing anyway, as a bit of a stereotype.
Yeah, too right. There's some real challenges when you kind of when you get into sort of onto the wards, I guess. Kind of one of the challenges of being I didn't to answer your question, I didn't really take any of the software forward, I don't think, other than mainly because I think a lot of the tools that I was using in education were very focused on learning. So, being in lecture theatres, being in seminars, things like that. Whilst when on the wards, it's very kind of on your feet, practical job. So they didn't really translate for me. I still used a few things. I used my dictation software, and I used a bit of tech that myself and a colleague had built, which kind of I became quite reliant on, and a few other bits. But no, I didn't really take a lot of the software I had. But yeah, certainly came up against a lot of challenges. One of the key ones is when I went into the NHS, you didn't really have digital notes. So, medical records were all paper. So, like these massive binders of patient notes that you had to both filter through. So if you wanted any information about the patient, you had to flick through these notes and 100 different people's handwriting to try and decipher, usually writing pretty complicated terminologies and lexicon, to try and decipher exactly what they've said. But then also going around on things like ward rounds with this kind of relatively flimsy paper folder, trying to scroll what your seniors are saying alongside the patient and balance this thing on your knee. And that kind of challenge of kind of your auditory working memory and processing what's being said, and then also sort of writing it down. I found that incredibly difficult, and nothing could really prepare you for that until you were there.
What did you do to make that easier on yourself, apart from start a company? I
guess thankfully that kind of process of kind of I guess what you call it in medicine being the scribe is relatively short-lived. So I didn't do it for a very long and it was really just a case of, I think, just having to work that extra bit harder, really kind of focus on what's being said, and it was just kind of practice makes perfect, I think. But it was really difficult. Often if I was with another colleague of we try and alternate maybe the role, so we could kind of catch up in between patients. But it was really, really challenging. You've got sometimes a consultant who's flying around the patient, just scribbling the notes down as fast as you can, trying to find the next notes, trying to get some new paper and all of this sort of stuff. It's stressful environment.
It's already a stressful environment, let alone with that built on top of it.
Yeah, too right. Yeah.
So we focused quite a bit on sort of, I guess, the difficulties of being dyslexic as a doctor. But how did you find that your way of thinking helped with being a doctor? We've already sort of touched on earlier on about use of visual thinking through your studies, but what about now you're in practice?
Yeah, so I think in practice, I think there's a lot of things that I felt I probably had, the things I struggled with, the reading, the writing. There was a lot of things that I think my dyslexia offered me as an advantage. The things I struggled with and the things that I had kind of maybe a more natural affinity for. I think, we talked about kind of my ability in say anatomy to visualize 3D concepts and things like that was very useful, and kind of also translated to more practical procedures and things within the clinical setting. So certainly I felt like I never really struggled in sort of the very practical aspects of the job. Communication skills, my sort of verbal communication skills, my listening, talking was probably above par, and I certainly found I never found that challenging. So I tended to be very good at gleaning information out of patients and drawing on that information to come to kind of the correct conclusions. And then there's that sort of lateral thinking as well. So taking sometimes desperate pieces of information and piecing them together, which is kind of clearly very relevant for kind of clinical practice. So I felt like that probably came more naturally than most to me. So there's certainly things that I dyslexic traits that suit medicine very well. As well as the kind of difficulties that come with kind of learning large amounts of information, usually in the form of textbooks and lectures.
So I can imagine it's quite satisfying as well, isn't it, when you pull these disparate bits of information together and gone, I think it's this, and then they're proven right.
Yeah, absolutely. And you do get that sort of, for all the sort of the coughs, the colds, the chest infections, you do get those kind of more unusual things, and it's always a bit of a thrill when you manage to cut through and spot the anomaly. Really, it is very satisfying. There's lots of very satisfying things about medicine, and there's similarly lots of frustrating bits as well. But,
I can only imagine. So you're kind of going along working as a doctor, and how did the shifting gear go from you're going to start a business? We've kind of touched on it with you saying about using assistive technology at uni and probably not getting as much as you want out of it, but then you do Medincle. Where did that come from?
Yeah, so I was at university, and one of the shocks I had going to medical school was, I was pretty happy that I was kind of going to a science-based course. It was the thing I was pretty good at school, and I was going to go into a science-based course, and then I turned up and I got my kind of lecture notes in these kind of big pamphlets, and sort of started to flick through, and the language that was being used was so complicated. These enormous words that meant absolutely nothing to me. And I really realized I felt very out of my depth very quickly. And then I was obviously challenged with using that lexicon and that complex vocabulary, which became even more challenging. And the annoying thing about medicine is you've not just got complex words and a huge number of them. And by a huge number, this is kind of the size of some languages. It's a huge amount of vocabulary. They're also esoteric often between American and English. So lots of I's and E's the other way around. So you've got multiple ways of spelling the same word, which for somebody like me who's dyslexic, it was just, an absolute nightmare situation. I could never kind of actually commit these words to memory. And then I had my sort of assistive technology that I'd been provided throughout university, and I thought, I can kind of draw on using some of those tools. But I unfortunately found that lots of them also didn't understand that complex terminology. So, you type in whatever it is, and it underlines it with a squiggly red underline, even if you spelt it correctly. And then you right click and there's no option for what it could be. Or you use some dictation software and you say the word dysuria and it types the word dishwasher, that sort of thing. So I felt a little bit I just felt a bit lost and kind of needed a bit of extra support. So I kind of looked for some software that might help, and it just so happened my one of my good friends at university, he had English as a second language and was having similar challenges with the terminology. And having found nothing that existed that did what we wanted, we decided to build the thing ourselves.
Okay.
So that's kind of how I kind of got into assistive technology, really by building a tool for basically me and my friend to use ourselves.
Oh, nice. What exactly does the tool do?
So the software is a piece of software that will provide you with, it basically augments your computer and the software tools that you use to better understand and utilize healthcare terminology. So the software is called Medincle. And if you're using dictation software, it will plug in and augment that piece of software so that you can talk, medical jargon at it, and it will understand it and transcribe it into medical words. Or maybe you're using just a word processor and it will augment the spell checker to understand medical terminology, or word prediction software or mind mapping software. Yeah, so basically it gives your computer a kind of a medical boost. So it kind of understands all that kind of that jargon, which if like me you struggle with words and text, and then you're sort of grappling with the complexities of healthcare lingo, it certainly was a bit of a lifesaver.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I like that idea that you just kind of, because it's not quite the same extent when studying an engineering degree, because don't use as much Latin, do use jargon, but it's giving all the physics jargon to it. And eventually the software, by the time I had finished with 4 years, it knew most of the engineering terms, but actually having something out of the box that would plug the terms in so it knew what was going on in the first place.
By the time you knew the terms, it probably knew the terms, whereas it would have been handy for it to know them, maybe before you did.
Yes, yeah.
So, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, stop lowercasing Newton.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I like that idea. So did that then spill into what is now CareScribe? Did you feel that as a logical extension, or did that come from somewhere completely different?
Yeah, so in a way it kind of fed in. So I mean, I kind of started Medincle back in 2013, and that was never intended to be a business. It was a piece of software, as I say, we kind of built for ourselves, and it sort of turned into our peers asking us if they could use it, and then the university we were at took on a license to the software for all the students, and then more universities and other educational and sort of healthcare institutions did the same, and it kind of over time turned into a business. But kind of simultaneously, I kind of had left medical school and started practicing as a doctor in the NHS. And kind of with that, I liked lots of aspects to medicine, but I was practicing. So when I was kind of a junior doctor, it was the kind of the first time the junior doctor strikes came around. So history repeats, but this was back then. It was quite a challenging work environment. I didn't feel particularly fulfilled by it. As I say, I kind of liked lots of aspects of it, but there was bits of it I felt pretty dissatisfied with.
Okay.
I guess the kind of the key bits were that I always I'm very creative. I like being creative. Within medicine, it's quite rightly quite algorithmic, and I kind of found at times I kind of wasn't really able to kind of flex that creative muscle really, and as much as I wanted to. And I'm also kind of malignantly ambitious, and in medicine again, quite rightly, you progress through medicine in a very structured way, and I found it kind of, you could be the best surgeon that ever walked the earth, but it will take you X amount of time. And I kind of, as I say, I had this kind of malignant ambition. I wanted to kind of always get there a bit quicker. So I started to get a bit frustrated. And what I found was, and that then paired, I guess, with the junior doctor strikes, which was quite a toxic kind of time to work as a junior doctor in the NHS. It kind of just left me quite dissatisfied, and the more dissatisfied I became in my day job, the more I kind of turned to this kind of software that I'd built and people were using and finding of interest, and started to kind of pour that kind of that ambition and that want to be creative into that. And the more I did that, the more sort of successful it became, and the more I wanted to do it. And what kind of started off as a bit of a vice became kind of more of a passion. And I started to kind of integrate into the world of assistive technology, and I guess kind of see the problems that I felt that I could solve, and then off the back of that started to build other pieces of technology.
Oh, nice. Cool. So did you swap into that full time? Was you still kind of part time at that point in your life?
So I was full time in medicine for quite a long time. So I worked full time in medicine for a couple of years. Then I in the NHS. Then I went overseas and I worked in Australia as a doctor for a few years. Absolutely loved that. And whilst I was over in Australia, the business and the software that I built at University Medincle started to become more and more popular, and that really drew me back to the UK and to go part time then in clinical medicine and focus on the business. And it's really when I kind of gave it that extra bit of time, that extra bit of focus, that it really started to rocket. So I worked part time for a little while, and then just as we were about to launch kind of CareScribe and CareScribe products, the pandemic happened, which was interesting for multiple reasons, both for launching a software company, but also for being a clinician. So
yes, of course,
yes. That was challenging. So I worked throughout the sort of pandemic and then stopped kind of clinical medicine to focus on the business, which by that point had grown quite significantly with lots of staff, lots of customers, and lots of work to do.
Yeah, so CareScribe didn't really come out of Medincle, from what I can tell, but two different companies, or is it a shift from Medincle into CareScribe, or are they two very different branches?
Yeah, so they're two separate companies. So Medincle's still going great guns with myself and Niels. We still run that business, and it's very successful, and the products have been used all over the world, which is fantastic. CareScribe kind of came out of it in the sense that it was Medincle that generated my interest and passion for assistive technology, and I guess for business as well. But then when we set it up, I set it up as a separate business, and I actually founded it with my brother, who's one of the co-directors and co-founders, and a friend of mine, Tom, who is our CTO, so our Chief Technical Officer. So we founded that together, and then built that company together.
Okay, so what is its purpose? Because obviously there's a lot of assistive technology around, and various companies do various things. And do you see CareScribe's purpose that's different from what's going on before it existed?
Yeah, so I guess one of the kind of reasons that we built CareScribe is because I was working in this sort of field of assistive technology, and actually part of being in that community and innovating within that space, I was approached by a couple of universities. They basically wanted advice on some problems that they were experiencing, which was mainly around captioning and note taking. So supporting students who needed either captions, but also transcripts and notes as well. And they sort of sat me down and set out the problem that they were having, and basically said, do you know of anything that exists that's going to help us with this problem, or can you think of a way we can solve it? And I thought it was a really interesting problem, and I looked around and couldn't see anything that really answered the issue that they were facing. And I felt like I could innovate and solve the problem. So built with Chris and Tom a product called Caption, which is our kind of flagship product, and we kind of worked on it in collaboration with a couple of universities, and then we launched that back in August 2020, and then it's pretty much been non-stop sort of since then. We've released other products, including Talk Type, and have continued to iterate and grow those products, taking the kind of feedback of our kind of community of customers and users, and developing the products kind of in line with their needs. So the idea was, I guess, when we started CareScribe, was kind of less of a we should start an assistive tech company, and more of a this is an interesting problem that we think we can solve. The business kind of, just like when I built Medincle, the business kind of formed around it, really. And
you're more experienced as a business director at that point as well. You kind of use Medincle to practice that.
yeah, exactly. Like I built tech tools before. I kind of I understood the landscape of, say, the UK assistive tech market. I kind of I kind of understood how AT is adopted by in education and in the workplace and things like that. So I had definitely had more of an understanding. But CareScribe has turned into a completely different beast, really, than Medincle. It's quite a big operation, and I've definitely I wish I'd managed to build CareScribe kind of knowing everything, having done it all before. But that certainly hasn't been the case, and I don't think will be the case going forward either. But yeah.
No. And okay, so if I've downloaded Caption.ed, or is it Captioned? I think it's probably the dot is throwing me off. Is it Captioned or Caption.ed?
Whatever you fancy, we call it Captioned, but yeah, whatever
it's
you
your
fancy.
company, so I'll go Captioned. Because it's Caption.ed, and I was like, Caption.ed? Who is this Ed? Okay, so Captioned. So I've downloaded it, and this is going to be Engineer's Corner. What do I expect as the user experience? What is it doing for me? Why have I got it downloaded on my computer?
Yeah, cool. So the problem that we're looking to solve, the kind of the mission of Captioned is to help support individuals with disabilities to comprehend information and to help retain that information as well. So nowadays, I'm sure you can relate to this in both work and in education. We are challenged with consuming huge volumes of content and information. In university, that would be lectures and seminars and it would be Zoom calls and Teams calls and all sorts of different things. And in the workplace, it's much the same. And it's in-person meetings, one-on-one conversations. You've got Zoom calls, Teams calls, but all these different interactions you have. Typically, those sort of interactions tend to be sort of 30 minutes to an hour long, which for many people is, it's just not a great way of digesting information. We know from lots of studies. There's a study by, I think it's the American Psychological Society, or those words in a different order, that sort of showed that in a lecture, for instance, you pay attention for about the first 15 minutes. And then there's been lots of studies since then that have said actually it's 10 minutes, actually it's 5 minutes, all the way down to about 8 seconds. And I'm certainly closer to the 8-second end of the spectrum, I think. But
the average TikTok video.
Yeah, exactly, right. I think actually that was based on the amount of time you spend on a website or something along those lines. But essentially what it isn't is an hour long or 30 minutes long. And that's the general population. So our ability to digest and comprehend information, if you're struggling to focus, you're not going to be able to comprehend, you're not going to be able to digest, and you're not going to be able to retain that information. Yeah. If you add on top of that a disability, it can make it so much more difficult to do exactly that same thing. It can take so much more cognitive function to be able to stay focused, to be able to comprehend. If you are deaf or have hearing loss and you are struggling to hear what's being said, and you're going to have to work that extra bit harder to lip read, to kind of tune into exactly kind of what's being said, or maybe you're dyslexic, like we're talking about here, and I auditory working memory deficit, and I'm really struggling to stay focused and take that information and process it and retain it. You just have to work that extra bit harder. It just becomes what becomes kind of challenging for most people can quickly become kind of impossible. And that's the problem that we're looking to solve. So the software itself will essentially allow you to comprehend that information better as it comes in, and also retain it. And it does that essentially by taking in the audio of the interaction and taking that dialogue and turning it into captions instantly. So on your screen, you will get live text as the person or people are speaking, which gives you a second modality in which to digest that information. So I could be listening to you and reading what's being said. Most importantly for me, if I miss something you've said, I can see it on my screen, or I can scroll back and I can recap on it. And then what I can also do is I can use those captions to take notes. So if you said something particularly important, I can highlight it as important, or I could jot down an extra bit of context. I'll make sure you send Matthew a link to that paper or what have you. I can jot that down, and all that information is saved for me to go back to later. So the audio, the original audio or video of who was speaking, and visual images that they were sharing, plus the transcript that's been generated and the notes and highlights that you've taken alongside it. So you can go back in your own time and revisit it. So that is essentially what the software does, and the problem the software is looking to help users overcome.
Okay, it's really interesting. And how are you finding people mostly use it? Are they using it in university lectures, or does it work through Zoom calls and things like that?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So the idea of the software is for it to be the term we use is platform agnostic, which is kind of one of those statements. So it means kind of what does that mean? But it basically means that you're not tied to something specific. So it works on Mac, it works on Windows, it works on iOS and Android devices. So you can use it on any device, but you can also use it in any situation. So if I go to an in-person meeting, I could use it. If I go to a Zoom call, I can use it. A Teams call. If I'm listening to a podcast, I can use it. If I'm watching a YouTube video or a Panopto lecture, it doesn't matter. If there's some dialogue there, then you can caption it, you can take notes against it, and you can take it away with you. So yeah, and one of the key things is, we've always had ideas of how the software can be used. We say, well, this will be really useful in this scenario and that scenario. And one of our big challenges, or as kind of, I guess, leaders of the business, is to not be too bound to our own concepts of how something should be used, not too bound to our own egos to dictate how something should be used, and be open to the software being used in different ways, and then understanding how it's being used to help to iterate on the product in the direction that our customers want to use it.
Yeah, and seeing as you're putting it out to a neurodiverse community, I imagine they found some entertaining ways that you never thought of for using it. What's your sort of favorite one of them?
Yeah, that's a good question. We found a huge variation in the ways the software is being used. From people who just want to have some captions on something. So that's that kind of maybe I can't hear what somebody's saying and I want some captions on the screen. Or for lots of reasons, captions have sort of proved to be very useful to many of us. In fact, Netflix has shown that 80% of its viewers watch Netflix with captions, which is
oh wow,
really interesting stat of just how useful captions can be, and how broad a usage kind of captions have across the population. Yeah, to kind of note taking, to uploading media in afterwards. So you might be you work in HR, for instance, and do grievance meetings where you want to record everything that's being said and have it transcribed so you can find specific mentions of things later. Or you might work in research and you do qualitative research where you're doing interviews, and you want to be able to go back and find specific sections of it. Because that's the other big use, video and audio as recording, sort of a medium for recordings. It's not searchable, whereas when it's paired with a transcript, it is. Yeah. So people find that very useful as well.
Interesting, yes, yeah. No, that's really interesting. How are you finding it with? In my head, I'm sort of like, I've imagined being in a lecture hall and it's recording the lecture, obviously. How do you stop it from picking up bits of other chatter? Is that something you can do, or is that more a hardware and microphone problem?
Yeah, so to a bit of a mix, really. It depends what the chatter is. If somebody's speaking very loudly next to you, then you're always gonna struggle. But we do some audio cleaning, so we can clean out background noise to focus on the speech that we want to do. And then also, as you described, you can use different pieces of hardware and microphones and things to really be able to improve the audio quality. So you might use, for instance, a little shotgun mic that you point at a speaker. You could also use little lapel mics. These aren't expensive bits of kit, but they would, that would be a nice way of improving the audio quality if you're in a noisy environment. And then there's other tools that lots of our customers use. So things like Phonak, you might have come across as they're a company that develop receivers and microphones and hearing devices predominantly used by people who are deaf or have hearing loss. We're compatible with lots of their equipment. So lots of our customers who use us purely for that kind of captioning element may have some of those devices, and they give fantastic quality audio. Mm-hmm. We pick up on that audio, and those devices also send that audio to the user's hearing aid if they have one. So, so there's lots of different tools you can use. But
Does it discern from different speakers? So, like, say somebody's using Captioned to caption this podcast. Would it know who the speakers are? Because obviously your and I voices are different, but it's one continuous piece of audio.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a kind of a process that has a relatively complicated name. It's called speaker diarization, so separating out different speakers from a single audio file. And we do some of it, and we're actually got a big project ongoing which finishes in July, which would be which will kind of see us through to kind of a new iteration of what we do for separating out speakers. So currently, typically we'll separate out speakers based on kind of new lines and things like that. So the way we display text isn't as a continuous stream, because that's very difficult to digest.
Yes,
We automatically punctuate it and we break it up into statement chunks. So we typically give a new speaker a new statement chunk. What we are doing at the moment is basically labeling those speakers and giving a degree of memory. So if, for instance, there's 3 or 4 of us on a call, I'm speaker 1, you're speaker 2, and then there's 3 and 4. And if you speak, then it will say speaker 2, and then I'll speak, it will say speaker 1, and then someone else will speak, it will say speaker 4, and it will remember those speakers and sort of apply them across a transcript as well. So that's a piece of work that's going on at the moment for this summer.
Yeah, so I was just thinking that'd be really interesting, because sometimes I've found with assistive tech is you have to sort of sit and do a lot of kind of sifting afterwards to get things out of it, where it's nicer when they start building more and more stuff onto them that it's already kind of clean by the time you've got to it to use it as the end user.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of one of the things, one of the key things within Captioned is I've been working with sort of speech recognition since sort of 2013, and that's a big part of kind of what we do. So transcription and speech recognition, and we within Captioned have a very high level of accuracy. So that they're taking the audio and turning it into text, getting the highest level of accuracy. So those words resembling what's been said, we have a very high level of accuracy there, but it's never going to be 100%.
No.
A human won't be 100%. So the other kind of key thing is being able to go in and easily edit that transcript afterwards, which is actually very complicated to do. And we had our engineering team working for a long time on perfecting that, but being able to go back in and edit those transcripts. And you think every word within a transcript relates to a bit of audio or a bit of video, and it relates to the words either side and what happens when you add a word or take a word out or split it into paragraphs. So that was a big piece of work. So we offer a very high level of accuracy, and also that kind of ability to go in and edit a transcript, because what we know is if you often when you look at editing a transcript, it can take about 2 to 3 times as long as the length of the transcript.
Yes.
So what we want to do is make that as quick and processed as possible. So that's something we've been working on.
Yeah, definitely. So where did Talk Type come out of this? Because I get the feeling Captioned was the lead product, and then you rolled into Talk Type.
Yeah, absolutely. So Caption was probably a kind of flagship product that we were kind of working on, but it was still in sort of core to it was speech recognition and speech to text kind of functionality. And then what happened was we were kind of approached again by a lot of our customers in the assistive technology kind of arena, who basically were talking about the problem they were having surrounding dictation. So they one of the key ones at the time was that there was a very popular piece of dictation software, a huge organization that's used to kind of it's used by a lot of users, and it's kind of much loved. And they stopped supporting Mac computers. So they supported Mac for a long time, and they kind of stopped supporting those users, which left a lot of people who liked that software kind of left in the lurch. So that kind of community came to us, and similar to how the universities had come to us with the kind of question around captioning and note taking, they said, is there anything you can think of, anything you can do? And again, because we were kind of working in that space, we sort of thought, well, actually, yes, we're perfectly positioned to be able to offer an alternative. And that's really where kind of Talk Type came from. So we built Talk Type as a Mac only dictation software. That allows people to build documents with the power of their voice and also navigate their computer. And it turned out to be really, really popular. And then the biggest demand we had once we'd launched it was, can I use this on my Windows computer? So, so what was originally, going to be Mac only, we ended up building for mobile devices and for Windows.
Yes.
So yeah, kind of cross platform, and the idea there is to give the customer a really high level of accuracy when they're dictating. So again, making sure that the words you say are the ones that are represented in text on the screen, make it quick. So you're not saying something and then waiting for even a couple of seconds that inevitably feel like minutes. For the text to appear, and then also keep it simple, because what we find is with assistive tech or any tech, the more complicated it is, the lower the adoption often. So we wanted to keep it really simple, really easy to use. And people loved that. So, Yeah,
interesting, isn't it? How one business decision to not support Mac anymore gives you an opening. And then you go to Windows as well. It's kind of somebody's face palming in your competitor.
I'm sure they'll be absolutely fine knowing them. But it's just kind of one of those, and we do things in quite different ways as well, and really good products, both them and us. But yeah, you're quite right. An opening came up, and we thought, again, just like pretty much everything we built, it's a problem emerges, and kind of the way both Chris, Tom, and I think, it's kind of, let's think of a solution.
Yes, definitely, and that's where all the best businesses come from, isn't it? People finding solutions to problems.
Absolutely, and we talk about dyslexia. We're solution orientated as as founders. All three of us are dyslexic, and that is the way in which we find our mind works, and we think that is why we've kind of thus far been successful. It's kind of those sort of skill sets are kind of inherent to the way our brains work, and and it's kind of works, I think, for entrepreneurship.
Yeah, most definitely. Okay, so this brings me to sort of the end section of the show, so to speak. So each guest on this podcast gets 3 rapid fire questions. They don't need quick answers from you, they're quick questions from me. So do you fancy diving into question number 1?
I think that's a loaded question, and hopefully your first question, so my answer is yes. And now I've only got 2 questions left, right?
Let's see if you can be that clever about the answers to the rest of that.
And the answer to that is no.
Okay, then. So, question number 1: what prejudice have you had about dyslexia that's been proven wrong?
For me, I think I often felt quite stupid in mainstream education. My feeling of self-worth was pretty low. I think generally, the way mainstream education is set up is for lots of reasons, is predicated on usually learning written text and that process and listening to people and comprehending information that way, and that did not work for me, as it did for my contemporaries, and that left me with a kind of a feeling of I think being a bit stupid, and not really seeing what value I had to offer. And I think that as I've kind of started to work in business and business leadership, that's very much changed, because I've been able to kind of see the value, I guess, that I bring, that others don't, and kind of see that as my own USP, really.
Yeah, definitely, and it's great to sort of shake the shackles off of that kind of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, and because it's definitely not true, and as is everywhere. In the EDI space, dyslexia has more strengths than people with dyslexia have more strengths than they do weaknesses, and those are very, very valuable. So
100%. Okay, then moving on to question number 2: if an alien landed and you had to describe dyslexia to them, how would you do it?
That's another very good question. I think I would explain that there are we have I would say that we have as a race, we have a diverse makeup. People's brains work in different ways. And there are a portion of people on the planet that have a brain that is that thrives not on absorbing information in certain ways, and has great benefits in other ways. I basically just, I think, talk about the diversity of people's brain types, really, and dyslexia is just one way in which some people's brains function, that has big strengths in some areas. People find challenges in other areas. I think that's probably how I'd tackle that one.
Yeah. Okay, so the final sort of serious question in the podcast, and you're not allowed to use your own products as the answer for this question. Seeing as this is the Dyslexia Life Hack show, what is your favourite dyslexia life hack?
I would have. That's a very good question. What is my favourite dyslexia life hack? Which doesn't involve my our product. For me, it would be mind mapping.
Yeah. Okay.
I find mind mapping is the best way for me to conceptualize information and to process it. So I use mind maps in pretty much everything I do. I find that way of laying out information is much better for me to absorb than anything else. Back at medical school, when I had to rote learn information, I did have software that did mind mapping, but I actually used huge A1 pieces of paper, or A0 pieces of paper, and pin them all over the walls, and then would draw kind of mind maps of the Krebs cycle and different ways in which enzymes work and all this sort of stuff. And I found that way of conceptualizing information was probably the thing, actually probably one of the key things that got me through that bit of medical school, actually.
Do you still use that approach today for mind maps?
All the time. Yeah, all the time. When we're talking about products and the way of developing certain features and functions, I'll always turn to a mind map. Even things like preparing speeches or talks or documents, I always will start from a mind map, because it's the best way for me to see information and piece together that information, and then create a cohesive narrative from it, really.
Yeah, no, it's a great hack, and there's quite a few people that mention it. It's something I need to do more often. As you were talking, I was like, I can think of how to use that at work. We need to sort of get into it more often. Okay, so before we sign off, is there anything else you'd like to add, and where can people find you?
Yeah, just to say thank you very much for inviting me onto your podcast. It's a real privilege to be able to come and talk with you. If anybody wants to find out more about me or any of our products or businesses, then you can find us at CareScribe.io. So look us up, get in touch. Always happy to talk, or just have a quick Google of any of our products, and you'll quickly find us.
No problem, and I'll link to all of them in the show notes as well. So
thanks very much.
That just leaves me to thank you very much for taking the time to come on the podcast.
Likewise, thanks so much for having us. Thank you.
No problem at all. And I want to thank everybody else for taking the time to listen, and I'll talk to you in the next episode. Goodbye for now.